Awesome.
Okay, so we are live. We are live. I will let you introduce yourself if you'd like to.
Sure. My name is Nick Sikowski. Um, should I say, I don't know, where I'm from? And
Yeah.
sort of, I'm grew up in Oriskany, New York, still live in Oriskany, New York. It's been 30 years of Oriskany, New York.
Love that. Um, yeah, I somehow miss it.
Yeah,
Ironically enough, like I somehow miss that upstate New York
it's sort of is like
shitstorm.
a black hole.
Yeah, it is, but like it's just one of those things where like if you get it, you get it, and if you don't, you don't.
Yep, and I think if you
Um,
grew up here, you get it.
exactly. Exactly. So oddly enough, amongst the sunshine and the palm trees, I still miss good old upstate New York.
I don't blame you. I always thought
Um,
I'd get out too.
yeah, you know what? And you still can. And maybe if you do, you can always go back, is what I tell myself. So
Absolutely.
the
It's always
black
good.
hole will always welcome you with open arms. So I actually was just thinking about this the other day, like about how long we've known each other, and it's been like quite some time.
Yeah, I think I first started at Banu in like 2017, 18
Yeah,
ish.
so we worked together there, and I started working there in like 2016.
Yep.
So we're going on like 7 years or so. It was super cool to me too because like there's definitely a lot of weird ass people that work there, and I found like a lot of friendship in them, but it was super cool when we started working together because it was the first time that I had like I was like, "Oh my God, another queer person."
Yeah,
Like I was
for
like,
sure.
"This is so cool." And I was still young and like going through a lot of like just learning and getting rid of like insecurities and stuff. So it was nice to just like have a person like you were just so chill. You were just like, whatever, I am who I am, like good vibes. And I was like, that's cool. I like that. But obviously like it's been a lot of time since we were both in that place and we've both had like a plethora of life experiences and we've like fortunately been able to I think that's the one cool thing about social media is that like even when you don't talk to people all the time or you're not super close to them, you still get kind of like a little bit of an in on their lives and you get to like cheer them on from the sidelines.
Yes.
So I just like remember randomly at a point in time, I can't remember if we were like directly chatting with each other or if you posted something, but I was just like, oh my God, you were like, I'm starting tea. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, that's so cool.
I
And
appreciate
so
that.
it's,
That's such a
yeah,
cool
like it's just
connection.
kind of like from there, you know, especially when you grow up in a place like upstate New York, like our community is rather small. And there are a lot of like, I think a lot of people that don't live in New York, which I'm experiencing now, look at New York and they think that it's like a really huge, really liberal, really diverse place because everybody outside of New York always thinks of the city.
Right.
So I always like tell people, I'm like, no, like I'm from like a small area in upstate New York and like it's very
The
conservative
opposite.
and very,
For
yeah, like very much the opposite. Like New York City is like its own world and in comparison to like the rest of the state. So that's definitely difficult too, and why I think that like community is important regardless. But it's especially important when you're growing up in a situation like that and you're having those like personal evolutions and you're learning new things and you're like this is who I am, this isn't who I am or whatever, like you definitely need those people even more
yeah,
to not ostracize you.
right. And that's something that has been interesting as well because like we talked about the other day over text, like sometimes it's people even within our own community that are
Mm-hmm.
not giving us the support that you feel like you should expect from
Yeah.
people, other
Yep.
queer people in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely want to hash that out. Because it's almost more heartbreaking, I think, than getting backlash or distaste from people that are not within your circles and within your community,
Yep.
for me personally at least. But I mean, it sucks regardless, right? To feel like alien when you are doing what's best for you and you're coming to terms with like who you are. But it's definitely even more so just a little like that's the best way I can explain it is just it's a literal heartbreak when you think in your heart of hearts that like people who identify with you on some level
Right.
are going to have your back and then they look at you with like side eye and you're just like, oh, right, I really am in this on my own. And like it shouldn't have to be that way.
Sure.
Um,
I think I've been extremely lucky up until this point. I don't know.
you say
I
up until this point, like your transition.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I have to call it luck because based on everything else I hear from other trans people, which I'm not like close friends with any other trans people personally. So I don't have firsthand accounts. This is stuff that I see through the lens of social media.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as far as like other people on TikTok and things like that, a lot of these people have been through social situations and things that just seem like the end of the world. You know what I mean? Especially watching
Yep.
it through their lens on TikTok. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
posting obviously to make a point about a negative experience that they've had, and I can't even give you one that I've had honestly up to
Yeah.
this point. My parents have been fantastic. My Both of my sisters, my partner, my son. Um, I haven't come out per se to I have three grandmothers and a grandfather that are still alive and none
Mm-hmm.
of them know.
And you do you see them?
I do. um One, my mom's mother, more often than all the rest.
Mm-hmm.
um and I think, she's she realizes.
Sure. Like
I
how
would
can you not notice somebody's like voice is changing or their appearance is changing or
And I haven't seen her in probably about a month, but she does like text me regularly,
mm-hmm.
just to keep up on things. And she doesn't come out of the house much. She's nervous about getting sick and things like that.
Sure.
And she was, interestingly enough, just to backpedal, as far as our relationship goes, the first like serious girlfriend I had, that same grandmother came to me and said, "I'm not okay with what you're doing."
Okay.
And I didn't speak to her for 3 years, probably. Things
Right.
like that. I was like, okay, you don't have to be, but like, I don't want to communicate with you anymore.
Yeah, like this is who I am.
Past
Right.
the point. Sure, like if you can't accept it, fine. Her
Right.
husband had passed away probably 3 years prior to that happening. And I think there's always room for change. That's what I say. Even when people try to use their old age as an excuse, she was
Yeah.
76, 77 years old, and she came around,
Yeah. I
apologized to
think
me
that that's
out. Like,
yeah.
so I think I don't even know if she knows that trans people exist. I mean, in the back of
Right.
her mind, of course, but like she's not thinking about that actively.
Not as a concept, right?
Sure. And if I ever went to her and decided that, okay, I mean, she's 81 now. If I said, "Hey, grandma, like this is who I am," she'd probably say, "Okay,"
Right.
you know.
And that's like such a huge testament to the fact that like exactly what you said. A lot of people do try to blame age or the generation that someone is growing up in, the time period that they exist in, as like a scapegoat for ignorance. Or now, like I was just talking to you before we started recording, all of this anti trans rhetoric and legislation that is surfacing in the South. A lot of the people that are backing that and spewing that rhetoric are saying like their justification, their very feeble justification is that they need to protect children, and that children should not be exposed to drag queens, and that drag queens should not be reading books to
Yeah.
children, and that children should not be at drag brunch because that is harmful. And we are exposing children to dangerous things and this, that, and the other. Which leads me to asking you, obviously, on one hand, you have your grandma who's like a very much older person who's able to come around just about like your queerness in general. But you also have a son, and he is how old now? I forget.
His 11th birthday is next week.
Okay. So he's 11, and you've been in his life for a few years now. So he was even younger than that. And like we had chatted about before, you came into his life pre-transition. And so he quite literally has walked that path with you.
Yes.
And so if you want to, I really am curious to know like what that experience has been like and what his perception of things has been like. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so his biological father is not involved in his life at all.
Hmm.
He hasn't seen him consistently since he was probably 2 or 3 years old.
Okay.
He totally left his life on his like fifth birthday or a little bit after. Like no communication since. Nothing. He talks to me about him intermittently. He'll say, I don't remember what he looked like, or I remember this about him, but I just know that he was never really there. And I'm like, yeah, it makes sense that that's all that you can remember. You were just a little kid.
Right.
And it's been super interesting, especially I think for like other families that see us. Like he's on the baseball team, he's in chorus, you know what I mean? So we'll go and see these other parents consistently enough so that we're on a friendly like first name basis. And it was always, oh, Nicole and mom.
Right.
All of a sudden it's mom and dad. And these people are confused, like,
Right.
and
These grown people.
yeah, yeah. And this is at a
And
point
then
where
it's this kid that's just like, no, that's my dad. What about it?
exactly. And he says, like, you're my real dad. Like you
Oh,
take care of me like a dad should. Like,
yeah.
and it's been interesting.
Hmm.
Um, it's definitely sweet.
Yeah.
But if I had to try to give you a list of who gets my pronouns right the most often,
Hmm.
he's number one.
Yeah.
My son. There's no question like, oh, this is who you are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't get what's so hard or harmful about that.
I,
The way that other people.
well, I can't answer that for you because I don't know. I don't know
Exactly.
either.
I know, and
But it's just so tender and so sweet, and it's just like his mind is forming and changing, and he's learning not only like about who he is, but about the people around him. And at the end of the day, you said it exactly yourself. Like the relationship that you have with him and the role that you have had in his life as a parent in a place where, someone else had that ability and they did not fulfill it. That's all that matters to him. So it's like you're this person, whatever, like you are who you are to him. And like I said before, it just goes to show that you could be 81 or 76 or whatever and change your views on things. You could be 9, 10, 11 years old and change your views on things because kids are so pure in that way that like they don't have all of this other identity has become very political, right? And so like they don't have all of that shit in their brains making them say, "Oh, what do you mean?" Like,
all right, there's no bias at all.
no, there's no yeah, that's like a perfect way to put it. There's no bias there. So he just looks at you and he says, "Okay,
Exactly.
you're my
And
dad."
nobody else except for children has the ability to do that. You know what I mean? Like I think
Mm-mm.
that's the coolest thing.
Not without jumping through
Yep.
hoops.
Yeah. Without having, personal turmoil because of ways that we've grown up and ways that society has told us that we should think or feel. And he
Yeah.
doesn't have that.
And like you said before, like I beg this question constantly and forever and until the next lifetime. Like what harm does that do? Because if nothing else, this kid now is going to grow up and evolve into his own person, and he's going to know, like, I can be whoever I want to be and whoever I am because I accept other people for who they are.
Yes.
It's not, oh, well, you're exposing your child to this, so he's going to grow up and be confused. Like, you're saving him from confusion.
Exactly. Do you know how
You're
confused?
saving him from that inner, like, my parents aren't going to accept me because I want to paint my nails, or I maybe have a crush on another boy, or whatever. Or maybe not. Like, maybe he's just like, I'm straight and like I'm cis and whatever. Like, but at the end of the day, the principle remains the same no matter who he is or no matter who he grows into as a person. There's not going to be this giant obstacle to overcome.
Right. It's just how it is.
That's unprecedented.
Exactly. I can't even like picture that in my mind of how my childhood
Right.
would have been different if I had that ability.
No, and even as people, right, who grew up with relatively accepting parents, like we still, because of societal conditioning, and I would say, like, on my part at least, just ignorance. Like, my parents were never hateful towards people that were different, but we just didn't talk about it.
Right.
And so there was this ignorance of like having to learn things on my own and then questioning, like, oh shit. And I had a very similar experience where, like, I was in high school and I was dating a boy for a long time. And then, and he came around my family, and my brother is he's like 10 years younger than me. So my boyfriend at the time would like hang out with my little brother and stuff and like whatever. And then obviously, like, we broke up and I came out and I started dating a girl, and I would bring her around to the
Mhm.
house. And then one time, like, my brother, who was only like 6 at the time, asked me, he's like, where's so and so? Like, referencing the guy that I had been
Right.
dating. And I was like, first, I like was like, shit. So then I'm like, well, buddy, like, we broke up. And I was like, but so and so that comes over to the house sometimes, who was like my girlfriend at the
Mhm.
time. And he goes, yeah. And I was like, well, we're dating now, like, just the same way that this other person and I were dating before. And he literally just goes, oh, and turns around and walks
That's it.
away
No explanation.
and carries on with his life. 6 years
Yep.
old. 6 years old.
Yep.
And now
That
you
easy.
ask the wrong person, and I ruined that damn boy's life.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh
it's
God.
insane.
Now he knows that the queers exist. Like,
Right, right. I think that the lack of exposure, which is just the point that's so natural to us,
yes.
but so foreign to other people, the lack of exposure is really what's harmful.
100%.
Sheltering people from things, sheltering children from mere human existence, right? And I think that it also speaks to the point that queer people are often over sexualized and over, like, I don't know if this is a word, but like predatorized. Like, we are seen as like we're exposing the kids to very explicit sexual
Right.
stuff or predatory stuff. And that is really what just like wrenches my insides,
Yeah, because
because I can't think of a safer community. Like, I actually just I took this video of myself talking last night, and I like haven't posted it yet, but I went on this rant because I keep seeing on TikTok this trend of people amidst all of this like anti-trans baloney that's resurfacing, um, of people who are saying, I grew up in such and such a city in Tennessee, and I was never, the drag queens never bothered me, but I was preyed on by my youth minister's stepfather, my youth group leader, the pastor at my
right.
church, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and so, again, like, it speaks for itself that Trixie Mattel reading a book to kids at a library is not what's hurting children, is not what's violating them and making them feel unsafe.
Yep.
And so, like, kudos to your parenting and your girlfriend's parenting, and just rejecting that completely and, doing your own thing and molding your own family dynamic, because that in and of itself, like, even though it's just muscle memory to you, that does come with some learning, of course, is like revolutionary.
I
Absolutely.
just going, 25 years without ever being a parent, and then all of a sudden having not an infant, but somebody who already forms thoughts and opinions and has their own
Hmm.
ideas, you know what I mean, was super interesting. And I just hoped and hoped and hoped that he would never come home from school and tell me, like, oh, people made fun of me because of who my parents are. And it's already
Mm.
happened on multiple occasions. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what you need to understand, unfortunately, it's horrible that I have to tell you this, but it's not the kids that are your age that are forming those opinions, it's their parents.
It's their parents.
And that's what their parents are teaching them. And that's
Hmm.
how we don't want you to grow up to be. Like, why we're
Right.
raising you the way we are, to accept people and try to understand other viewpoints, other types of families.
Yep.
And it is heartbreaking that kids who are, 9, 10, 11 years old in this class that are like, what's the matter with you? Like,
Right.
and when,
Right.
he was perceived as the kid with two moms a few years back, a year ago at this point, it was, where's your dad, you freak? Like, that's what the
Oh.
neighbor kid would ask him. What's the matter with you? How come you have two moms? Like, and he never even came to me and told me that until a year after it happened because he didn't want to hurt my
Hmm.
feelings. Like,
The empathy
I
of
know.
that
Like,
being,
why can't more people
uh,
just be like that? It's just,
yeah, but you know what though? I was just gonna speak to that too. Like, as awful as it is, and as much as you definitely have a part of you like triggered and angry when your kid comes home and says, hey dad, like so and so's making fun of me because of like you and my mom and whatever. Bringing the point to light that, like, as much as you don't want to tell them, like you said, these kids are not saying those things out of their own free thinking. They are saying these things because obviously they are being taught. And it obviously goes to say that cliche but really true saying that, like, hate is taught. It's not
right.
natural. People are not born hating other people. Um, it's taught, absolutely. I think that too, as difficult of a conversation as it is to have, allows um, a sort of empathy to form too. Like, obviously, we don't want those things said to us, and we could never imagine saying those things to other people. But it allows you to almost put some sort of shield over yourself and will allow him to do that too. To like rise above it and say, okay, how sad
Yeah.
that your parents are teaching you these things, and how grateful am I that like my parents are instilling empathy and acceptance and love
Yeah.
into me.
It's interesting.
And that's the sad truth. And of course, you don't want to rip those band-aids off of your kid, but you also can't leave them in the dark that like people are going to be fucking
Yeah.
shitty. They are going to be incredibly shitty. But he has his people and his, you know, the place where it's most important, which is home, is a foundation that's teaching him the right things and instilling him with a sense of security. So he'll be all
Yes, he
right.
definitely will.
He'll be all right. He'll be more than all right. He's smarter than most adults. Come on now.
Sometimes.
Um,
Sometimes I think it's true.
yeah, yeah. Like, how many genders are there? And he's like, actually,
Let
I'm
me
like,
tell you.
what the hell? I was in college. I was in
Yes, yes.
college before I knew what a non-binary person
Exactly.
was. Okay, I was in college. This kid's
Hmm.
11.
And he was,
Like, props.
it just slipped my mind. I was going to tell you something else he said to me last week. Oh, I was in class and I was making this. I'm like, okay, were you doing this for science class? No, all about chromosomes and sex
Hmm.
chromosomes. And I was like, where did you learn this? He's like, a book. I'm
Right.
like, okay, well,
Yeah.
that's really cool. Um, and he said something alluding to the fact that he thought that sex and gender were the same thing. And I was like, oh, can we
Okay.
talk about this? Yeah,
Teachable
I'm like,
moment, right?
cool, awesome. So yeah, you know that there's, more than just two combinations of sex chromosomes. I told him that a long time ago. Like intersex people
Yeah.
exist. That's a
Yeah. I just had this conversation, by the way, sidebar, with my 54, almost 55-year-old
see, it
father.
doesn't matter what age. That's the thing. You can always learn. And I'm sure
Right,
your dad
right.
was like, great. Like,
Oh, I mean, he knew that that existed, but just we got into like a deeper conversation about like the issues that intersex people have when they are born with ambiguous genitals as infants, and then their parents opt to have them operated
yeah, one
on,
way.
and then all of the issues that that can cause
Right.
throughout their lives and whatever, because things don't match up with how they feel and whatever. But go on.
So I, laid that all out and explained the difference between the two. And just like you said about your little brother, when you explained to your new partner, he goes, okay,
Yeah,
that's it. He goes, I'll
right,
remember that.
right.
Okay, great.
And I'm sure you will.
And
Right.
that's not, that, I think that obstacle in people who are so opinionated um, has a lot to do, not being able to distinguish between the two things or want to try to distinguish between the two things lies a lot of the issue.
Sure. Sure. It's like absolutely bananas to me or you or, other like-minded people, but there are really still full-grown individuals who walk through the world with a very binary thinking of like, if you are born with a penis, you are a man, and if you are born with a vagina, you are a woman, and that is literally it. No discussions.
Yep.
Like, how dare you downplay the complexity of humans like that?
That's perfectly put.
I mean, goddamn, you're really doing us all a disservice. We are so much more than that. And for some people it is that simple, right? But for other people it's not, and that's totally like duh.
Yeah.
One size doesn't fit all. Like, how do you expect that to ever make sense? And so speaking of which, I kind of wanted to dive into the conversation that we had like a few weeks back that kind of like sparked the uh momentum
Yes.
for this. Um, so that whole one size fits all piece of, you get to a certain age, and like for us, that was, getting to a certain age and having this like enlightenment and being like, okay, I'm gay. Great. You're
Right.
gay. That's got its hurdles, right? Like it's got its hurdles in and of itself, but that's not a completely out of the ordinary experience. Um, but then for both of us, in very different but also like interrelated ways, we continue to grow and evolve as individuals, and we're like, maybe that's not all there
Mm-hmm.
is to it. Just kidding, guys. And so that's when like the stuff got real sticky. And so maybe if you want to like unpack that a little bit for me, because I cannot speak on your experience, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. I think that, again, if I was more informed, like earlier on in life, that I might have been able to put the puzzle pieces together a little bit more efficiently.
That lack of exposure definitely adds to confusion, and I think I can speak to that point as well. I think if fluidity was more normalized,
Yeah,
I may or may not have had a similar experience of just being like, okay,
exactly. This is okay. This happens. This is a thing that I don't
yeah,
want to say normal, but definitely a thing that happens. I don't like the word normal. um,
no, no normies in this house. Mm-mm.
um, but yeah, so it probably, I mean, looking back, it was so glaringly obvious. I don't understand how I hadn't figured things out much
Yeah,
prior to when it actually. I definitely had it figured out at a point, probably somewhere in my mid 20s. I was like,
okay,
okay, like lesbian is that's not me. Like I thought it was for a long
sure,
time. It felt right at first. I felt a lot more
and that's
right, a lot
okay.
more at home. People were
Hmm.
more accepting. I met other people within the queer community, felt I had a support system and this whole family. And
Mm-hmm.
then all of a sudden I was like, not not so much a lesbian.
Sure. Sure. Well, yeah, because you're a boy. Like, come
Right.
on.
But I didn't know that that was, again, till college. I didn't know that trans people existed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That was something where we
Yeah.
grew up that was talked about much.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever go to that place? That's what it's called
That
in Utica
place.
on Genesee Street. That's
I
like
don't think
the
so.
only queer bar around here.
There's a queer
Yeah.
bar in Utica? Nick.
So I would
Whoa.
hang out there when I was like 19, 20 years old. And I saw a drag show for the first time. And there were kings and queens in the show. And I was like, I need to do this. Like, I need to see how I would
Yeah.
look like if I presented as male. I'm like so interested in this all of a sudden. I
Mm-hmm.
loved it. And I go all the time and watch. I
Right.
never got the gall to actually get up there and do it, but I definitely would have had a blast if I did.
Right.
And probably would have expedited me figuring things out even more quickly.
Sure.
um,
But that curiosity was obviously piqued. Like,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
let me ask you something. Like, in the time that, like, I don't know how old you were when you came out as a lesbian,
You're
but
like 19.
in the time, yeah. So, like, in the time that you identified with that and surrounded yourself with, like, similar identified people, during that time, before even you started to, like, scratch your head, did you feel out of place
Yeah.
in ways?
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. I
Yeah.
mean,
Because there's that whole cisgender piece, right? You're like, I got the liking girls
yeah.
thing down. Love me a lady. But there's that other piece of things, right? Like, not only are, sex and gender not exclusive, but like sexuality and gender are not exclusive. And that was a brain bust that I never grappled with until
Yep.
like recently. Um, so yeah, there's that whole like, yeah, I guess I can identify with this community because they like girls and
Yeah.
I love girls, and but there's that whole other piece of things that,
It's funny.
you deserve to be a
Yeah.
whole puzzle.
Looking back, I give props to my mom so much. She's great. Example, fourth grade, I remember clear as day, they had Pilgrim's Day, right? Bear with me here.
Okay.
So you couldn't come to school and participate in Pilgrim's Day unless you dressed as a pilgrim. And I said, Mom, I'm not going. Oh, why not? Don't you want to have
Right.
fun? It'll be great. And I was like, I am not putting on a skirt. I'm not doing it. I don't feel comfortable with
Yeah.
it. Now, at this point, right now,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it, fuck yeah, I'd wear a skirt. But as a
Yeah. It's the
yes, and it
security
is. And
though,
I didn't have that at that point. I was just so
Of course
confused.
not.
And,
Right.
even then, I was like, I can't do that. I don't want people to see me dressed like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Well, at that age, like we see, because of the way that we're taught, we see gender as a very
Exactly.
performative thing. And so you're like, if I'm labeled as a girl and I do this thing that girls do, it's going to reinforce the idea that I'm a girl, and I don't like that. And all of this subconscious thinking is going on in your fourth grade brain, and you literally have
Yes.
no idea, right? It just boils down to I'm not
Guess
wearing
what?
a
I haven't
fucking
heard it
skirt.
put into words
I'm
so
not doing it.
eloquently until this moment in my life.
Yeah, thank you.
But that is true. Gender as performative, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Judith Butler. Look her up if you, I'm
I
sure you
don't.
probably already know who that is, but Judith Butler does a lot of work on the dissection of gender
Okay.
as performative. How gender is actually like pretty much completely performative. There is some feeling involved with it, but at the end of the day, it's really all about what kind of performance you want to give both
Yeah.
yourself and the world
Yes.
around you. Incredible.
I will
Anyway,
look into that for sure.
love her.
So, needless to say, my mom called up the school and said, my kid's coming, but she is going to be dressed as a boy pilgrim. And I did. And it was
Yeah.
great. And I loved that. I was so happy. Like,
Yes.
what, and
Many parents would probably be
I
like,
know.
absolutely not. You're wearing the fucking skirt
Yeah.
or you're grounded. But your mom just looked at you and was like,
Yep. That's my
all
kid.
right. That's gold. And those are those moments that you look at as, back at as like a 30-year-old grown adult, and you're just like, thanks for not
Yep.
pressing me
She never
about
did.
that. Whether she realized what was going on or not, you obviously had no idea what was going on at that point, which is normal. Like, you're a kid. It's just like, who
That's what
cares?
it comes down to all the time.
Who
Who gives a
cares?
shit?
Who literally fucking cares? Like, I had a little pride get together last summer, and my good friend brought her son. He was 6 at the time. And she has like a very like-minded view of just letting him be who he is, teaching him to accept people for who they are. If he wants to grow his hair out, if he wants to cut it, like, whatever. And so she is in the line of cosmetology work, and she's like painted his nails before for him, like black, or like taken him to get his
Yeah.
nails painted with her, just to normalize like the fluidity of experience, right? It's not suggesting, and a lot of people think that it's suggesting things, and it's really not. It's just letting a kid be a kid, pick and choose
Hmm.
what they like and don't like. And so she wasn't able to make this gathering, but like his dad brought him to hang out with us for a bit, and she ended up texting me, and she was like, uh, I mentioned, I was like, oh my God, like he looks so cute, whatever, whatever. And she was like, yeah, you should tell him that you like his nails because like a lot of kids on the bus have been making fun of him. And so I went over to him and I was like, hey, it's like, your nails are super cute. And then he just was like, thanks. And I was like, did your mom paint those for you? And he goes, yeah. And it was just like,
Did does he like them though? Obviously, still wearing them.
come
Like,
on. Of
yeah.
course he does. But the thing that made him question it
Hmm.
was other people, other little assholes
Yes.
on the bus that said, you should not have that. And then fast forward to present day, this was last year. He's in school and he has like a little bit of like a longer, shaggy like hair. And a kid, very innocently, that was at school with him said, your long hair makes you look like a girl, kind of. No
there's
malice,
there's
just
7, right?
pure
Yeah.
kid wisdom, right? And so he goes, and his mom like just posted about this because she was like super proud. And I'm like, you know what, this is perfect to share. So he goes, oh, he goes, well, you're a boy too. And like, if you wanted to have long hair, you could have long hair. Like, that's totally fine. And the kid just looks at him and goes, oh, all right, thanks. Like, why can't we,
I
why
know.
can't we
That's
do
so.
that? Like, we're supposed to be the ones in charge here, right? Um, and so it just goes to show that like those really small moments that you think are no big deal, like your mom saying, my kid's going to school dressed as a
Yep.
man pilgrim today, and I don't care. They are like that ripple effect. It just, it's so important because the things that we are instilled in us, whether positive or negative, really do, they're
Yeah.
carried with us
That I will
forever.
never forget that. You know, that's probably like the
No,
earliest point where I
yeah.
can remember. Like, if I try to think back on childhood, where these things might
Mm-hmm.
have start to become apparent to other people if they were looking for it. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? That would be it. That was,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's crazy. So when you started to really conceptualize and like actualize, maybe there is more to this and maybe there's more to who I am. We've both talked about feeling, number one, really accepted by some people, which is great. And I think that it's the less riveting story, but the one that needs to be told more and more and more because it's like far and few between. Um, where, especially when I talk to, trans friends of mine, because being gay, although I'm not diluting the fact that queer people in general are completely not treated the way that they should be, we should be. Transness is a whole different dialogue, a whole different, experience. And I think one that is less palpable to most people around us. I remember specifically being told when I came out, when I was 16, like that's fine, but don't go dressing like a
Yeah.
boy, right? Like the envelope can only be pushed so far. So when you're really ready and you feel it necessary to defy all of those things, right? Like I'm comfortable here to an extent because I'm more digestible for
Yeah.
people around me. I have community. I'm more understood even by those who don't quite understand me. Like, what is that? What has that meant for you? Like, what has that encompassed for
It's
you?
something that I honestly never even considered prior to starting my transition. Like, that isn't something that occurred to me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's ignorance on
Right.
my part for not thinking ahead that much, or even, before I realized that I was going to start transitioning and actively pursuing a transition. I didn't think about people around me having those experiences, and that sounds like a shitty thing to say, but it's true. I was more, you know, the older I
Mm-hmm.
get, the more I try to expand my knowledge within this community,
Sure.
um, just to make sure.
Well, I think in a way you've given yourself permission,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, I would say so.
Like,
It's been, I don't know, reiterate your question again. I'm sorry, I got off track.
I think just like to the effect of, we've talked about on the sidelines a bit about how, like, once we each in our own ways said, okay, my identity is a bit more than this one little box that I checked once upon a time. Like, we both came out as gay, and then for you, it was like, okay, like, I'm not a cis lesbian, like, I am a man. And for me, that was like, I am not a strictly like binary lesbian. Like, I don't really, even to this day, label myself as one thing or another because it's just, I've heard of a lot of confusion, I guess. So now, which I think is the coolest thing ever, that we've like re-adapted this word,
Yes.
I'm just like, I'm queer. I'm queer. I have had meaningful relationships with cisgender women, with trans and non-binary people, with cisgender men. Like, I and I always found myself cutting corners each time like a person would come into my life that made me question that, because I was like, God forbid I step out one toe
Right.
of this box of being this lesbian that is a woman who only dates women. Everybody is going to be so
Yes,
mad at
other
me. And
people's
that's where
perception.
this
That's what it
confused.
is.
Yes. So that's what I wanted to get into, was just like how other people's perceptions of you, once you've already like, we've stepped out of the norm a little bit, right? And we're like, okay, we're gay. But then there's this whole other conversation. Once people have gotten used to you being one way yet again, there's this whole other thing that you experience. And a lot of the time, like we both mentioned before, you're dealing with that from your family and your friends who are not necessarily in your community of identity. But it also comes very much, and a lot of the times, mostly from the people that are in your community of identity and who you thought of
Yeah.
everyone else would have your back.
I haven't felt alone in any sense. And that was the fear I had, because again, like I said earlier
Sure.
on, TikTok is basically the only exposure that I have to other trans people. I'm not
Right.
close friends with any other trans people, so I can't compare back and forth an experience with someone else who might be going through similar
Right.
things. Um,
Right.
and I think we talked a little bit about the space that I socially am permitted to take up as someone who's perceived as male versus someone who went 29 years being perceived as a woman. Like,
Yes, like in your work, I think we mentioned, or you had
yes.
talked about
And
it in
that,
your
I
workplace.
mean, I feel like I live at the hospital, live and breathe the hospital. So that's
Right.
the first thing that comes to mind is that at first, my coworkers were a super tight knit group. There's only like 6 or 7 of us that work together. They
Mm-hmm.
were nervous that they were going to offend me somehow by
Right.
referring to me by, I don't like to call it my dead name, just a previous name. I,
Call it whatever the
um,
fuck you want to call it.
sure.
It's
So
yours to
if they'd
have or not
slip
have.
or, misgender me, and especially in front of the patients too, who are perceiving me as male at this point, the patients would look
Right.
confused if I got a she from one of my coworkers, and they're like, "Oh my god!"
Right.
Like, I, I could feel for probably a solid maybe 3 or 4 months, everybody just felt like they were walking on
Mm-hmm.
eggshells around me, and that's so not what I want. I'm so yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Like
I'm
we're
relaxed,
humans.
like, and they know
It's,
me as a person. They know my sense of humor, and
yeah.
I'm like so zen and chill. Just as
Yeah. Yeah.
as a rule, my personality. I'm not gonna fly off the handle for a misgender here or there. Like,
Right. Well, and I always think there's a difference between somebody who like actively commits to misgendering someone and, and calling them by a name that they don't want to be called by, and then there's someone who genuinely like has known someone as this person with this name and these pronouns, and then they accidentally slip on that and they correct themselves, or they are committing to, you know, honoring your identity as it's evolving. Like there's a very, very big difference for me, at least, between someone who's just like, that's not right and that's not who you are, and I
right?
refuse to step out of my comfort zone. And then someone who's like, oh shit, I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Like, I
mhm.
forgot. We threw that name in
And
the
that's it.
trash.
And
My bad.
every one of
Like,
them just
or correcting, like someone that corrects themselves, doesn't say the right thing off the bat, but then they correct themselves. Like,
yes,
that's
exactly.
okay. I feel like that's
Everybody,
okay. Like,
I
it's
give
human.
everyone the space to make mistakes. I make mistakes. You know what I mean? Do you know how many times I
Hmm.
sign my name a day for
Yeah.
how many years, and how many times I've signed
Right.
Nicole Sikowski, like after
Right.
like actively being called Nick for a year? It still happens. Like if I can do it,
Right.
so can anybody else.
Right. Yeah, it's that willingness to admit like oops, and then, do better the next time or whatever. Like when I was teaching at New York Mills, I obviously very open about who I am and being a queer person and a safe space and an ally to all of my LGBTQ students. And I had a trans student hanging out in my classroom one day, and I was just chatting with him or whatever, and I'm a very theatrical speaker, like whatever. And so I'm talking, and he was telling me about something that pissed him off, and I was like,
Oh,
"Girl," and then I stopped myself, and I was like, and he was just
right.
waiting for me to finish my point, right? And I was like, I just want you to know that I was not saying that in like a gender specific way. Like I
To
say
anybody.
girl, I call my boyfriend girl. Yeah, like everyone is a girl, like to me. So I just felt so nervous, and he was like, Miss H, it's literally fine. But I just like for that one split second didn't want to be like, oh shit, I'm like every other teacher
Right.
that, dead names him and misgenders him and whatever. So I wanted him to know in that moment that like that was not me being blind. That was me being a goofy idiot, like I am. He's like, you're fine. Go
It's
off.
good.
But yeah, I, and again, like it speaks to like he's 14. Kids,
Mhm.
they're the best. It's like, yeah, you made a mistake, or you said one thing and you didn't mean this by it.
Yep, we're
Like,
moving on.
whatever,
What was your
keep
point? Right.
going. But it's yeah,
Yep.
he's like, and you were saying, and I was like, oh yeah, right. I was making a point. But it's the adults that I really have beef with. I got to be honest with you. Um, because we've both spoken to similar experience of saying, this is who I am, or saying that we are pursuing this or that to make us feel closer to who we
Right.
truly
And
are.
people, like, from an outside perspective, someone who's not queer, someone who's not an ally, like someone who doesn't actively think about these things that happen to people around them all the
Hmm.
time, like, oh, you must have problems mentally. You have a mental disorder because you're
Right.
allowing yourself the space to change and grow over the span of not just your childhood into, early 20s, but on, as any human
Yeah.
should have the ability to
Right.
do, grow and change.
You have a mental illness because you didn't peak in high school. I have a mental illness because I have sustained years of trauma on account of my socioeconomic status, my gender, my
Yep.
sexual
Yep.
orientation. But go off. Go off. I'm mentally ill because I have had girlfriends and boyfriends.
That whole
You got me. Um, and it's really like when you deal with people like that, because we're always, always, always going to deal with people like that, right? Like it's just a hard pill that we all have to swallow. You go to your communities and your safe spaces because, like, of course, the journeys of gender identity and sexuality are ones that we ultimately go on with ourselves. That's something that happens within ourselves. But we are humans, and by human nature, we crave community and connection with other people, and we crave
yes.
validation from other people. So when you're dealing with that shit of people who don't understand and could never ever tap into the experiences that happen to other people every day, you go to your people, right? You go to the people who you think are your people, your communities, your connections that you have already established, and people that have historically made you feel, seen and safe and valid. And so, like, sometimes when the narrative changes for you, those people, like we've mentioned a couple times now already, in those communities, like you go to them and you're like, guys, can you believe this? And they're like in a huddle already saying shit. And
Never
you're just
mind.
like,
Yep.
oh,
Forget that.
right.
Yeah.
Never mind, right? Like I'll just go fuck myself, I guess.
So,
Um, so, you know, it made me really angry. It made me really resentful. And I don't know if this is an experience that you can resonate with, but it made me really just not even angry, resentful, like in a mean, nasty, negative way, but just like angry, resentful in a really deeply
heard it.
hurted way. Hurted. That's a word. English scholar over here. Um, in a really heartbroken way to feel ostracized by those
Yeah.
people as well. Like I was
Yes.
disowned
That's
by a
more hurtful
lesbian.
than being disowned by anybody else. Yeah.
Paint an A on my chest. I was disowned by the lesbians. And it's like, at a point too, like, let me also make this disclaimer. When I was younger and I came out and I was like, I'm gay, everyone, and I found community with other, lesbian women, had this mentality that, like, bisexuality is not real. You're
Yeah.
actually just a closeted lesbian, or
Hmm.
you're actually just going to end up with a man. And I really did shit on people who had fluid sexual experiences because I think I
Yeah.
had a lot of
Yes.
repressed bullshit in myself. And I wanted them to like me so bad. And I wanted to belong so
Yep.
much to this one little niche. And so I was like, fuck them. They're indecisive.
Mhm.
And I kind of spewed that rhetoric myself. And then I would find myself like being attracted to people and, wanting to communicate with and chat with and date a wider variety of people. And I was like, well, shit. Like, I feel those things too. And it definitely doesn't, it's not okay to only validate other people when you have that experience too. But I think it took me realizing that, like, this is real and it exists. And maybe you've been a brat because you just didn't
Yep.
want to push the envelope yourself.
That fear of,
Um, to finally have that because, like, I would say, oh, yeah, I'm kind of talking to so and so. And then I would constantly get hit with the, but you're a
yeah,
lesbian.
says you. Yeah,
Why
says
are you
this
talking
person
to
who's
that
not
man? You're
you,
a
you know?
lesbian. Right. Or like when even beyond just the whole like binary thing thinking, when I dated for the first time, dated a person who had at one point very heavily identified with the lesbian community, but then started really growing into their identity as a non-binary person and actualizing that in like their everyday life. And that made me too, like my love and my connection to this person made me scratch my head and say, I know that this is a you thing, and I
Yes.
will never try to steal your sunshine.
Hmm.
But what does this mean for me? Because not only was I celebrating this person for who they were, but I also took it as a moment to reflect on myself that, like, I am very equally attracted to your masculine and feminine energy. Like, I want all of it. I love all of it, whether it is or it isn't, or it's both or it's neither. And so that was like a thing in college for me that was like, what does this mean for me? And that's when the thoughts really started occurring. But it wasn't until like probably this past year I would like talk to whoever on the download, date whoever, and I would get those ignorant comments from people like, why are you chatting with that guy? You're a lesbian. Or, I would even be in relationships with women and like in my romantic relationship have want to be open and honest and vulnerable with them about like past relationships and you talk about your, oh yeah, this fling or whatever. And I was met with like really wild insecurity that like you're going to cheat on me with a man or you have a secret boyfriend or all of this just this crap. And so I internalized it and was like, you're right. And so I kind of like for a good few years almost felt like if I was dating a woman, I had to be like,
Wow.
shut off everything else. Right now, I'm a lesbian. I am sapphic to the nines, women loving women, blah, 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 blah. And then it was like if I was dating anybody else, that's when things got kind of stickier, I guess. But I guess I just had this little bit of an epiphany because I started like hanging out with different people and I would just kind of talk to them like I was single. So I was just kind of like chatting with whoever and I would tell my friends about that stuff and no matter who it was or what the dynamic was, they would just be like, okay. And that validation from those people for the first time in my life was kind of just like, why the fuck
Right.
haven't I let all of this exist at the
Yeah.
same time? Like, and so going into like new relationships and like even my current relationship, that was something that like I was very upfront about from the beginning because you don't know what you're going to be met with, especially from like non-queer people. And like we said, even the queers, we love to throw hate at each other. We got to knock it off. Um, do better. So I just was like, this is who I am, and these are some of my past experiences, and like I carry those with me.
Yeah.
I don't erase that just because I'm with you. And he just was like, okay. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And he was like, your point?
Right.
And
Wasn't that
I was
part of
like,
this?
I just wanted to let you know. Like telling someone you're a convicted felon, except for telling someone that you're like a retired lesbian. In that, I have dated women and I still very much am attracted to women, but I also like
Yes.
this is valid too. This is real too. Like I just find love in many, like I have historically found love in many forms, and that's okay. Like I think that a lot of the time, and we kind of already mentioned this before, I was in the car with one of my friends last summer and we just got on the topic of it. Because I was just getting really pissed off about, being met with the whole like, well, I thought you were this or I thought you were that from other people who don't live my life and don't live in my brain, and don't have my feelings. And so I said to her, I go, I know you think the thing that's happened here is that all this time I've thought that I was very confused. I thought that I must just be confused because I keep jumping from this leap pad to this leap pad to this one, right? And so that must mean that I'm confused, right? But I think the thing that made me confused was not the jumping, it was the reactions from other
Yeah.
people whenever I
I,
moved a
yeah.
certain way. If everybody would have just shut the fuck
Yes.
up and let me move and figure things out, and maybe even be confused at a time or two, as if that's not natural, I probably would have been a lot less confused,
Yes.
if that made
100%.
any sense at all.
I know. It's that
Like, just shut
outside
up.
just perception of you rather than, you know how you perceive yourself and how you want to perceive yourself. You might not
Mm-hmm.
always know the steps you have to take to get
Mm-hmm.
to a certain point, but definitely,
Right.
you know, and like you said, confusion is okay, even if you're going through it, working it out. Other other people trying to
That's
tell
best
you
path.
like what you're doing is inconsistent with how I perceive you is the problem.
Always open to conversations. I think that we need to keep having these conversations. We will always have these conversations, but especially right now
Yes,
because people are
majorly.
trying to cramp the style, and it ain't gonna happen. You can pass any laws that you want. You can ban anything that you want. We will always exist. We will always be
Thank you.
here. Thank
I
you so
loved it.
much. This was absolutely wonderful. I loved it too. It was super awesome. And maybe sometime in the future
Yes,
we
it
can
would
get your dope ass kid on the mic because I think that he has some
for
very
sure.
philosophical tea sipping
I
points
have
to make. Um, but yeah, I send
yes.
you all of my
Thanks.
good juju.
All right,
Yeah,
sounds good.
no problem. All right, I will chat with you soon. And for the rest of you, I will see you next Tuesday. Peace.
My man don't love me, treats me oh so mean.